Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Solo Spooky Story. My name is Robin, and I'll be your host. The Solo Spooky Stories are short stories every other week where I will present on something that I've found quite interesting, something that Suze has found, or something a listener sent in to us. And yeah, they're just a fun, short 10 to 15 minute episode that a lot of people seem to enjoy. So, we like to keep things with a bit of variety, and this is definitely different to the main episodes. So with that said, we're just going to get into today's story because it's a really fun one. So as you all know, I am big fan of UFOs, and I will maintain that till the day I die. Huge fan. And I like to just kind of glance around in my spare time at different kind of stories and things like that. And I came across this really cool article and kind of subsequent story the other day that I'd never actually heard of. And it's just a fun, weird story that if it's true, it's insane. If it's made up, fair play to them. There's quite a bit to it. And it's fun as well because it's not the usual, black triangle sighting or something based in the US or something. This is based in the UK in the 1980s. So, peak of the Cold War. Europe has a lot of shit going on at the time, but it's not the usual kind of mainstream UFO stories that we would hear about. I just cringed even to saying mainstream UFO stories there, but you know what I mean, the popular ones. This is something a little bit different. So unusually for me, I don't really talk about sources and all that, especially when myself and Suze are talking, but I thought this one would be a fun one, and because I enjoyed reading it so much, it's important that I actually cite where I found this, because it's pretty fun and people can go look at it themselves. So I initially ended up on ufoinsight.com, which is actually a great website. Big fun there, lots of stories. And it ended up leading me down a bit of a rabbit hole to the British UFO Research Association, or BUFORA. And these are similar to the organization MUFON, which is based in the States. It's kind of like a British equivalent. They basically do investigations of UFO sightings, they conduct research, they generate reports, they talk about sightings, all that sort of stuff. And what I found was a report from 2008 by one of their investigators called Gloria Dixon. And this takes place in June of 1981. And Gloria Dixon called this report Night Shift, which, it's got a pretty interesting name to it. It kind of makes it read more like a story than a report. But from what I can see online and the kind of additional research that I've done, this does appear to be correct. She's just given the report a name, obviously just for search terms and things like that. It's just easier to find. So we're just going to get into it. So as I said, this takes place in June 1981, and there's a man here who's kind of the focus point of this story. So his name is Steve Robbins, which it's such a just classic name. I can picture this straight out of Stranger Things or some sort of the Goonies or something, just general sort of name. Steve Robbins. And he was working as a plant operator for the Phillips Petroleum plant on Teesside, which is kind of up around Newcastle. And he was working on a night shift, hence the name of the story. And approximately around 10 minutes to midnight, he was coming back to control room when he says that he looked up into the sky only to see this enormous flying object. He described the object as about 100 feet in length and 20 to 25 feet wide. He says that it was flying between the two towers of the petroleum plants, and that he was able to estimate the height of the object to be between 100 and 120 feet, which is, it's pretty high up there. It's a pretty large object as well. So he said that the object appeared to be kind of moving downwards, and he actually started to get a bit concerned. He said that it wasn't moving particularly fast or anything, but that he noticed that it was moving fast enough that it eventually ended up right overhead of him, and that as it kind of got closer to him, he was able to make out more that it was this kind of cigar-shaped craft, which we know we've all come to know now, the cigar shapes. But he said that this had this dull bluish steel color, and that there was some sort of luminescence off it, like a neon light. So I find that really interesting, actually. I don't think I've ever heard of that before. And he said that it was obviously completely silent, as these things are. And he said that the reason why he started to get concerned, though, was because there was these large crude oil spheres, those giant spheres that they store oil in. He said that there was a number of them nearby, and that he kind of figured with the direction it was going and the speed it was going and at the height it was traveling, he was concerned that it was actually going to hit them. So thankfully it didn't hit it, and we definitely would have heard about the story if it did. He said that it cleared the spheres within kind of a matter of feet, basically, that it slowly kind of went above them and it kept going. So Steve claims at this point then that he jumped on his bike and pedaled quickly around the roadway to see behind the spheres, and he says that when he got to the other side of the spheres, that the object was gone. So he then claims that he went to his colleagues and basically told them what he'd seen. So he told his supervisor that, you know, what he'd seen. They all went outside, but there was nothing there. So his supervisor, doing, you know, the responsible thing, contacted the Teesside airport, and they naturally said that there had been no aircraft that had taken off or landed in the last hour. So then they contacted RAF Flying Dales, which is an RAF base in the area. And when I looked into this base, they couldn't look more like bad guys if they tried. So it's this Air Force station in the North York Moors, and the building looks like something straight out of a James Bond villain's collection. And their motto is in Latin, but it translates in English to "We are watching," which, like, you can't make this up. Like, it really writes itself. So it's supposedly a radar base, which makes sense for why it's watching, but it also has a ballistic missile early warning system. So, you know, they're obviously paying attention to a lot of shit going on. And it's some joint intelligence sharing operation between the UK and US governments. And yeah, basically its primary purpose is to give the British and US governments warnings of impending missile attacks. And yeah, it was apparently a lot more active during the Cold War than it is now. It was actually quite important during that time. But anyone who's interested should look up RAF Flying Dales. Like, you cannot make this shit up. It looks like, as I said, something straight out of a James Bond villain's collection. And I love that their motto is literally "We are watching." Like, it writes itself. So anyway, they contacted RAF Flying Dales, and they started apparently to ask questions of Steve Robbins, and they claimed that there was another UFO report that had been made. So he kind of took it as one of his colleagues must have made a report. He called around the station, around the plant, and eventually he got a call from a security guard at one of the tanks who said that he was situated about 1.5 miles away from the tanks where Steve was, and he claims that he saw an object very similar to Steve. He described it apparently in a very similar manner, and that it was actually, when he saw it, it was heading in the direction of where Steve observed it. So he clearly saw it before him. Steve then saw it afterwards. So this kind of was a cause for concern, and apparently the plant operator and Steve's supervisor were concerned about security at the plant. So allegedly 4 weeks prior to these specific sightings, another employee had actually made a report of an object trying to land on the main road at the plant, which is just mad. So apparently there was 3 sightings in the space of a few weeks, basically, 2 of them in the same night. So nothing else really happens at that point there. But Steve then reported that a few days later that he started having electrical problems with appliances in his house. So initially there was some issues with the Hoover in his house, or vacuum cleaner for our American listeners. The toaster, hair dryers would stop working, the iron wasn't working, main alarm clock, it all failed, a battery powered portable radio, apparently that failed as well. And apparently his television burst into flames, which is just crazy. So this was so dramatic that he apparently had to throw the TV out the window to stop it from burning the house down, which, yeah, I don't really know what else to say to that. So apparently the electricity board was contacted. They did some investigations on it. They said there was no issues with the electricity. The neighbors didn't report any issues either. And the reporter herself, Gloria Dixon, she actually inserts into the report to say that she actually talked with 2 engineers independently from the electricity board, and they both said to her that they were completely, like, stumped by whatever was going on here. So yeah, Steve continued to talk about these issues. He said that computers would fail around him. Apparently when he was in the room, it was more likely that colleagues would also experience issues with electronics and things like that, which was just quite strange. And he decided to go work offshore in 1983 because obviously there's a good bit more money in that. And they apparently reported offshore that a lot of the electrical equipment was starting to fail, and it was generally when Steve was in proximity. So yeah, just to say that this continued for quite a while. Now, the really strange thing about this whole story is Steve reported that about 2 weeks after the events happened, the sightings, he basically says that strange things started to happen to him when he was sleeping. Now, let's just suspend, the very clear suggestion here that it's sleep paralysis. We'll just ignore that for the moment, and I'm going to continue to tell you the story, and then we'll come back to it potentially being sleep paralysis. But let's just pretend for a minute that it isn't. So Steve goes on to say that one night he was lying lying in his bed. He was asleep when he was awakened by a high-pitched humming in his ears. So the report says, and I'll just quote directly from the report because I can't do it justice otherwise. His first realization was that he was flat on his back and that he was unable to move a muscle. He felt strongly that this was not a dream, that he was awake and could move his eyes. He was aware of the room about him and the darkness. He tried to move but couldn't. When his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized that there was somebody in the room. 3 or 4 figures dressed in black, barely discernible in the darkness apart from dull cloak-like habits. He wanted to scream but couldn't. He remembers a slight gurgling coming from his throat. That is when they communicated with him, not in voices as he remembers, but like a thought transference. He was told that they would not harm him or his wife, who was in bed next to him, or his family or his 2 sons. He tried to wake himself up further, still believing that this must be a dream, but it was not. Still terrified, he tried with all his will to move a muscle, but could not. He could feel sweat trickling down his forehead into his eyes and hoped to God his wife would not awaken. They communicated to him not to worry and that she would not know anything about this. And he remembers thinking, "What the hell do you want? Just you for a little while," was the reply. So, yeah, Steve then goes on to talk about how eventually he was able to break out of this paralysis. We're not saying sleep paralysis. And they disappeared as soon as he was able to regain control of his body as these things happen. He claims that he went downstairs and, effectively didn't sleep again for the rest of that night. And that was that. So he claims that he had numerous other experiences again, but he never saw the hooded figures again. He claims that he was only able to sense their presence in the room instead. So he claimed that after all of this, that he was able to experience several precognitive dreams, and that they basically were these disturbingly powerful and compelling, which is a quote from the report, that he found them impossible to ignore, and that basically he was seeing things happening in the future, like days or months ahead or even years. And he claims that he had visions of the Chernobyl disaster and the Lockerbie bombing. So I don't want to get into speculation there, but yeah, it's just very, very strange. He claimed that in particular the Lockerbie disaster, that he had a dream about it 6 months prior to it happening, and that when he saw it on the TV with such clarity that he was in total shock, and that basically he knew that this was going to happen, that he'd seen it before and was just completely dumbfounded by it. So yeah, that kind of ends what I'm going to talk about today. I want to talk about just 2 theories, two kind of scientific theories as to all of this, and I'll leave it there because I think we've already talked about UFOs enough. We kind of get that potentially was UFOs that were experimenting on him for some reason. But the British UFO Research Association suggests that this could have all been caused by hallucinations caused by gas or oil. That basically the area that he was working in, there could have been fumes from gas or from the oil that was there, and it could have caused him to hallucinate and see this object in the sky, and that the stress of seeing it all basically caused him to have sleep paralysis as a stress response to what he was seeing, and that, this very possibly could be the cause of it. I am going to say that I completely agree with that. I think that's the most likely one, but I suppose to give some credence to the UFO side, it could have been a hallucination, but if it was a hallucination, why did a security guard 1.5 miles away also see the same thing at the same time? So, it begs the question, was it a hallucination or, was it something else? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. This is a cool story. I really like this. There's a few more bits and pieces to it, so if people are interested, they should read the report themselves or go onto UFO Insight. They can see the story there. But yeah, it was just a fun one that I found really interesting, and it kind of gave me a few other bits and pieces to look into in the future. So I will definitely be looking further into some more cases that come out of this. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can reach out to us on social media at Instagram and Threads at the Spooky AF Pod. You can get us in the YouTube comments once this episode goes up at the Spooky AF Podcast. And you can also get us on Gmail at the Spooky AF Podcast at gmail.com. As I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'd love to know if you think it's a UFO or if you think it's all hallucinations or if it's potentially something else. But with that said, I hope you're having a lovely day whenever it is you're listening to this, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.